Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Mike Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. We're doing this actually on, so fifth time in the last 100 years that Hanukkah starts on the day of Christmas. So,
I thought you were going to say there's a fifth time we've done a podcast on Christmas.
Have we? This is
I
probably
don't think
the
so.
first.
Yeah,
this is probably the first. Trying to think let's see, January 6th is at Tuttle's. That's our next live show. Then January 22nd is at Elsie's. So Margot, put that on Anthony's calendar. The 6th at Tuttle's, that'll be at 7 p.m. The 22nd at Elsie's at 7 p.m. And it's fitting that we're doing a wild podcast on Christmas. You know, wild colors. We might as well do it
For sure.
You have your mother here. So this might be the most respectful that I ever am to you during a podcast because I can't be mean to you in front of your mom. Although I'm sure you've witnessed it before.
Well, you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
She's so interested in the show, she decided to try to find a book to read while we record the show.
She listens to the show. I know that. That's the thing. So everybody, hopefully we see out there on January 6th and the 22nd. Wild in a little blip, but lowered the temperature with the win over Chicago, worst team in the NHL. As I wrote in my story,
That's a well-earned worst record in the league.
Even like that game, I was just thinking like, and let's be honest, you and I both know the Wild should have won that by a lot more. I mean, it was just so like everything the Wild wanted to do, they really could, and then they almost tried to cute their way to the win, and I think that's what kept it close. But that team stinks, and so like again, nobody is trying to insult anybody's intelligence and say like they're out of their funk here. They've still lost 6 of the last 9 games. Luckily, they've given themselves a heck of a cushion with their great start to the season. You know, I thought John Hines' message after the game was a good reality check, you know, not just for the media, for the fans, but for the players, is that there's been a lot more good this season than bad. And the reality is that they had gotten points in 22 of their first 26 games, 18 of those wins. And they've had a rough 9 games, and every team goes through this. Brock Faber said it after the game, and now the goal is to get out of it. Now it won't be easy on Friday. You know that game is not going to be easy. Right. Just the place they're playing, the team they're playing against, and then the situation of not practicing for 3 days and hopping on a flight. You guys are going to spend 3 more hours on a plane that day than playing the game. If you think about it,
right.
The round trip. I mean, it's just stupidity.
It's actually there. It's one of the things that, and we can talk about this a little bit. We might as well just talk about it now. I was looking at I think there's a couple easy fixes for the NHL to make a minor adjustment in the way they schedule games. And this is one of them. Push the season back 1 day and have everybody just return to practice on the 27th and travel like you normally would. Because when you think about it, those games are almost always played by a rival, a division rival in most cases, because it's somebody that's one of the closest cities to you distance-wise. Mm-hmm. So you're playing a very important game against a division rival, and you're putting one team on a plane that hasn't skated in 3 days to fly down to another city.
Well,
and
have
play
you looked
game.
at the other 8 or 9 games that day? Everybody's on an hour flight except for the Wild.
Right. And so that's my point is that even those though are still not, it's still a disadvantage to be the team
why
that
are
has
the Wild
to fly.
not in Chicago, St. Louis, or Winnipeg?
Right.
And then you have a bunch of teams that get to practice on the 27th and don't play their first game until the 28th.
Right. So I don't know why. I think it's an easy fix.
Yeah.
Just extend the break by 1 more day in terms of games. Have everybody skate on the 27th, and now you're at least back to normal. Yeah. And it's still a disadvantage to be on the road, but it's a minimal disadvantage, and it's more like what you play during the season.
If you look at every other team, they've got 8, 9 a.m. flights that day, and the Wild have to show up at the airport because of how far the flight is at 7 a.m. I mean, it's just crazy. By the way, your flight's at 7 a.m. in case
I hadn't seen
there's
that,
zero
actually.
chance that you knew that.
No, I know we were flying that day. But so I think that's one thing. Then the second thing is that, and this will segue into the discussion about the Wild's funk, is that yes, they're in a funk. There's no question. But they also played 3 out of 4 games in one stretch against teams that have been in the finals in the last 2 years that were also right on top of their game. Mm-hmm. They played Edmonton when the Oilers are 12-2-1 in their last 15. They played Vegas. They're 12-3 in their last 15. They played Florida. They're 10-2-1 in their last 13. So they were catching teams that tough times. But then the one to go to Winnipeg. And I looked it up because it just felt like it was always second of back-to-backs when the Wild go up there. And in the last 2 years, so last year and this year to this point, the Wild have played 21 back-to-backs. There's only one team in the league that's played more. The Washington Capitals have played 23. Winnipeg's played 11. And that to me is absurd, that the teams in your own division, like I get it. If the teams in the East play a few more back-to-backs because their travel is so short, and a lot of times it might not even be a flight if you're New York, New Jersey, Philly, whatever. But Minnesota's played 10 more, almost double what Winnipeg has played. They've played more than any team in the West. The only team in the West that's even close is Chicago, who's played 18. But it's Minnesota 21. And then if you look at the bottom of the league, the fewest, Winnipeg 11, Calgary 11, 12 for, I wrote it down just so I wouldn't forget. It's Calgary 12, Colorado 12, Arizona, Utah 13, Dallas 14. These are all the teams that the Wild are competing for a playoff spot with. The Wild have played 21. And these teams that you're going to compare your record to at the end of the season and say you play roughly the same schedule because you play the number of games within your division and against the Pacific. But if you play 21 of them back to back, and then, I mean, just Minnesota.
Have you tweeted this, by the way?
And I get it. The league schedule, it's complex. And you got a whole bunch of teams that, because they're sharing arenas and all of that, have Minnesota's not one of those teams.
Yeah, by the way.
And so Minnesota can play just about whenever the league says that we got a game for you. But this isn't the Wild requesting we'd like to move this game so it's a back-to-back. And I just think it's an easy,
also just the number of times the Wild play a second of back-to-back in Winnipeg,
right,
when they haven't played when they're rested.
It's 3 times in the last 2 years.
Yep.
So 3 times last season and this, the Wild
of the four that
played up there.
Yeah.
Both of them this year. And these are important games. These are the most important games on your regular season schedule, are against Winnipeg, or against Dallas, or against St. Louis or Colorado. And when you look at those numbers, the Wild are 1.5 times the number of back-to-backs than any of them. And their record's about the same. In those second of back-to-backs, the Wild are about 500. They're 8, 9, and 4. Winnipeg's 6 and 5. I mean, it's not like they've just done better in the second of back-to-backs. Their winning percentage, their points percentage is about the same. They just have to play half as many. And I think it's something that's got to be corrected to where the teams that are in your own division should all be within a game or two. It isn't going to ever work out so that if Minnesota plays 12, so does Dallas, so does Colorado, so does Winnipeg. But if one team's playing 10, the other shouldn't be playing 20.
Yeah.
And I know that's not in one season, that's over 2 seasons, but still, if one team's, everybody should be within 10, 11, 12, say, in the same division, and make it so that it's even, because you get games like the one the Wild played in Winnipeg on the 21st. That's what we use the term a scheduled loss. That was a scheduled loss. The Wild had played the night before. They're playing, that was the 3rd and 4. It was in the middle of 4 and 6. Winnipeg's been off for 3 days, sitting at home. The Wild are on a flight, back-to-back games, and they're beat up on top of it. There was very little chance that the Wild were going to go in there and win that game in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And now this is the second time. They went up there and played the second of back-to-backs earlier in the year and happened to lose some guys the night before against Seattle in a shootout game in St. Paul. And when you at the end of the year start to look and say, oh, well, they missed the playoffs by 2 points, or they fell 2 points behind Winnipeg for home ice in the first round, or for a division title, or whatever it might be, look back at this kind of stuff and say, are you comparing apples to apples when these teams' schedules are what they are?
Yeah, it's not fair to the organizations. It's not fair to the fans. It's just, I don't get it. And again, not to take shots at the schedule maker. He's got 32 of these to do, but it just seems to be, from a competitive disadvantage standpoint, this league is beyond belief sometimes in the way that it does stuff.
Right.
And
I get, there's things that are different, but like when you look at the California teams, they're in a similar world. They're all about the same. Like Anaheim 16, LA and San Jose 17. Well, that makes sense. They're got the same kind of travel. They've got a proximity situation with Anaheim and LA where you can get back-to-backs easily sometimes where you don't even have to fly. But why is their number even different from what Minnesota's got? It just doesn't. I don't understand why that part isn't a closer situation. I think that can be fixed. So I think those are two things that I'd love to see the league address and change moving forward. Because now I'll go back to what the funk for the Wild, because yes, they've lost 6 of 9 and clearly their game is not as sharp. But as I mentioned, they happen to face 3 of the league's absolute elite over that stretch, and all of them happen to be on top of their game right now. Then you have the game in Winnipeg, and then you look at a couple the others that went in there. Like Utah, the Wild couldn't have played much better, and just Vemelka was great that night. They get beat 2-1. The Vegas game could have gone either way. Couple clunkers in the Florida and Edmonton games at home, and the scheduled loss in Winnipeg. And I know that I heard John Hines use the term to talk about the schedule challenge of the Edmonton game at home. And that kind of was too, because they had the back-to-backs out in California, had the late flight home from Utah to an off day, and then to face that Edmonton club. Not quite, everybody's got games like that, but that was going to be a tough one for the Wild and with the injuries they're facing. So I think the game slipped. But I don't think it's time to panic, because there's a lot of teams that if you all of a sudden give them in a week stretch, okay, you're going to have Florida, Vegas, and Edmonton coming to town right now. There's a lot of teams that are going to drop those 3 games, no matter how well they're playing.
Yeah. And good news is that Eric's next return is coming at some point here. I still really do doubt that he plays Friday, just because of having 3 days off and not skating and all that stuff. I bet you Sunday makes the most sense. I'm not entirely.
I never doubt anything with Eric.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a guy that breaks his foot and is back on the ice in a couple of days. I mean, I don't know. A
lot of it will depend if he is on his own going down to Tria during this Christmas break, because I still think that most likely it's Sunday's game against Ottawa, and not necessarily that the Wild won't cancel practice on Saturday, because again, they're going to land at 2:30 in the morning, and then it's a bit of overload situation on Saturday. When I was talking with John Hines about what his plans are, because he's still at a loss of exactly what they should and could do. A lot could depend on the game in Dallas. Good news is that Philip Gustafson returned the other night. Was a little bit rusty, but I thought, stabilized. Yeah. And there were some big saves that he had to make there because of some boneheaded mistakes of the Wild, and as Philip Gustafson said candidly after the game, just bad habits that have crept into their game lately. There were tendencies in that game to do the same thing. East-west in their own zone, turnovers behind the net. That stuff has to stop, because as you and I have discussed all year long, their 5-5 goals against has been tremendous this season. And I think that's the easiest thing for them to get back. The one thing that has been, there all year long that you and I have discussed on this podcast on whether it would catch up to them, and it seemingly has, is their lack of offensive generated chances. So if that's not going to magically fix itself, which I don't see how it will at this point in the season, they've got to get back to defending better, and then trying to fix their special teams.
Yeah, Eriksson X return helps that.
Yeah.
Because now your second line, where they've been trying desperately to find somebody to play with Matt Boldy in the middle and create offense there, and they just haven't been able to do it. So you put Eriksson Ek back there and hopefully you rediscover a little of that magic that Boldy and Johansson had with Eriksson Ek a couple of years ago. And now all of a sudden you might start to see that, because now everybody else is in their normal spots. Now Freddie Gaudreau is in a more comfortable spot lower in the lineup. And, that can help for sure. But I agree in that I think what made them so consistent at the beginning was the structure with which they played, and therefore they never got rattled. And in this stretch here, they've seen themselves fall behind by multiple goals a couple times, where then the game has loosened. And we talked about it a lot early in the season, where I don't want to say it's easy, but it's certainly easier to maintain your poise, your composure, your discipline, and your structure when you're winning games and when you're never chasing games. The challenge was going to be, what happens when you hit this bump and all of a sudden you're down, you're giving up the first goal, you're losing a couple of games. Can you stick to it? And how quickly can you pull yourself out of it? And I think that's we don't know the answer to that yet. It's been 9 games. When this 9-game stretch started, They had just won the front end of back-to-backs in Anaheim. They had the best record in the NHL at 18-4-4. The next night, they had to play back-to-backs in LA against a rested Kings club in a place where they never seemed to play well. And they got run over in that game. And it's taken them a while now they did find a way to win a game in Utah. They did win a game at home against Philadelphia, but it hasn't been the same kind of team and the same kind of swagger that we saw early in the season. So now we'll see. Maybe this break comes at a good time and you kind of come out with a reset and go back to playing the way they played so often.
Right now,
early.
I mean, Foligno, 2 goals in 21 games, Hartman, no goals and, or no points in 15 now. And 1 goal in his last 23. Goudreau, absolute funk. Boldy, absolute funk. Kuznetsov, just can't score. There's just a lot of pressure. Johansson's in a funk.
I think some of that is just it's amazing when you take away one guy at the top,
right?
And now you got a whole bunch of guys out of position,
and what it's done to Boldy,
right? That's been a big reason why Boldy's dried up. But now Goudreau playing in that spot against a more significant defensive opponent every night, instead of playing against third and fourth liners like he was so often early in the season. They need something from those guys. They need at least a little bit from, yes, they've had American League hockey players up there. Those guys haven't done anything offensively, but they also haven't given anything up, and they're not the guys on whom you're leaning. It's all the other guys that you just mentioned that now are in a slightly more elevated role. They've needed somebody there to step up and pick up the slack in the absence of Eriksson Ek, and they just haven't gotten it.
And look, Boldy, I feel for him. Look, you look at his lines. This is not your prototypical second line that he's been on for 10 games now, but he has got to play better. I mean, he is back to East-West hockey, throwing pucks away, being soft on pucks. It must continue. I mean, you are a stud on this team. You could put Kaprizov with anybody, and he's going to figure out a way to make that line better. And Boldy is just not doing that right now. And I've got to think. John Hines was doing a lot of trying to protect Boldy. The first part of this funk, he's not so much anymore because I think he sees it as well now. And Eriksson Ek, I think there's going to be pressure on Boldy when he comes back to become the player that we saw at the beginning of the season, because then there's no more excuse factor anymore when you have Eriksson Ek back on your line with JoJo. He has got to play better. And right now, I've been really disappointed watching him the last 5 to 6 games.
When he was on his game, playing with Eriksson Ek, it was such a simpler game.
Mm-hmm.
It was a straight line game. That line was so good because they didn't make any of the East-West plays to which you referred earlier. We were seeing that from Kaprizov and Zuccarello, and they always have the leash because they convert enough of them to make it worthwhile. But the Eriksson Ek, Johansson, and Boldy line was it seemed like they played a mistake-free game almost every night. And with that came scoring chances. We looked at Boldy's numbers during our Chicago broadcast, and I don't have them in front of me. I think it would be this last 9 games. So it would have been 8 games at that time. His shot attempts were down from over 7.5 per game to 4 per game. His shots on goal were down 1.5 to 2 shots per game. He's still in the top 10 in the league in shots, but he only had 8 shots on goal in the 8 games heading into Chicago. So they need more from him, but at least at this point, I'd give the guy a pass. He was a point-a-game player before this 9-game stretch, just 2 points during the first 8. And I think we'll see a guy that gets back just with the comfort of having his centerman back on his line.
Let's take a quick break. Aquarius Home Services is by far the longest sponsor of War Seats in the House, and probably the entire network, to be honest. But I wouldn't come on here and endorse them every single week if I didn't absolutely love this company. They've made a real difference in my life, from worry-free water to plumbing, heating and cooling, and electrical needs, my Kinetico water treatment osmosis system that's right under the sink, everything. And with winter here, their dedication to keeping my furnace running smoothly brings peace of mind, especially considering how many days I was on the road to start this season. What sets Aquarius apart is their commitment as a local family-owned business. They prioritize their customers with transparency, upfront pricing, and respect for your home and time. I highly, highly recommend Aquarius. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. Reach them at AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
We love supporting local businesses. We love working with local businesses. I started buying stuff at Twill in the Edina Galleria a long time ago. When I started this podcast network, I was really hoping I'd be able to work with Scott Dayton, the founder and owner of Twill, and I was lucky enough to be able to do so. Now my closet is pretty much all Twill stuff. I don't get free stuff. I don't get discounts. I don't ask for discounts. I go there and pay full freight because I want to support a local business also because the stuff is awesome. Just bought a fresh batch. I'm about to go on a vacation with my wife. Everything I'm packing is Twill stuff because it wears well. It's comfortable. It doesn't wrinkle on planes. It doesn't wrinkle in suitcases. It comes out looking good. It wears like iron, and I'm never going to have to replace it. It's just so simple. Everything from casual shoes to dressy shoes to golf stuff to dress stuff to suits. By the way, you get everything tailor fit, which really helps me out. And everything from, gopher stuff to winter stuff to summer stuff. They just have everything. So go to twillmn.com, sign up for email updates. They won't send you anything unless they have a very specific event they want you to know about. They won't spam you. And go in there and say hello. Tell them we sent you. It's just a pleasant group of knowledgeable people. They are experts at what they do. It's the best men's clothing store in Minnesota. Go check out Twill online and in person in the Edina Galleria.
Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, January 6th, 7 p.m. at Tuttle's, January 22nd at Elsie's at 7 p.m. That's our next two live shows.
We got a big Christmas dinner coming up tonight. But before we get into I want to hear about Christmas Eve, but Christmas, we got spinalis cut from Feller's Ranch tonight. That is going to be terrific. My favorite cut of steak. I'm really excited about it. So I hope you came hungry.
Yeah, I'm always hungry. That's the problem.
How was Christmas Eve?
It was really good. I went out to my cousins out in Minnetonka, Deep Haven area. Had a blast. Always good seeing them and spending time with family. And it was really neat. Yeah. So how was yours?
It was good. Build your own pizza night. We had our Feast of Seven Fishes just before Christmas.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I know you're disappointed, but that was our night with all the crew together, all 4 kids, their significant others. So a group of 10, 7 kinds of fish. It's so much fun. It's one of the great traditions we have with Christmas now. And then my family was here. My siblings and my mom were here for Christmas Eve for Build Your Own Pizza Night.
Nice.
And a little more casual, just kick back.
And I saw you did your traditional Mall of America run.
I did. 37 out of the last 38 years, I've gone Christmas shopping on Christmas Eve. The Mall of America for probably the last 30 or so. It was kind of interesting as I was wandering the mall a little bit by myself that day. I had to drop AJ off at the airport because he and his girlfriend were flying to New York that morning. So I shot over there, and as I was thinking back on some of them, and I think probably 20 of them or so have involved my brother, maybe 26 or 27, my boys. You've been with us a couple times there. I remember the random bloody ear story where as we were all of a sudden sitting, I don't remember if it was in the car or at lunch.
No, I was going down an escalator, and I was on the step above AJ, and I look at his left ear, and it's just crusted blood. And I go, AJ, do you have blood in your ear? He goes, oh, really? And no reaction. And he's like, I thought it was hurting. He's like, yeah, I thought my ear was ringing. Apparently there was some wrestling match and he got hit in at 5 a.m. and apparently bled out.
I wasn't aware of that part. I hadn't seen his ear yet at that point either, but it's a great tradition. I love being out in the malls.
I bet I could find my text right now to Margot. I said, do you know that your son has blood coming out of his ear right now and your husband does not seem to be bothered by this?
Well, as long as it was clotted, it wasn't like he was bleeding all over the car or anything, but it was, I grew up in the retail business. My dad owned Hallmark card shops when I was a kid. So we used to spend so much time in malls, and the Christmas season felt like it went forever because you were always walking around in malls, and our Christmases ended quickly because the day after Christmas, we were always in the stores for the day after Christmas sale. And I think that's maybe part of why I like being out in the malls and just enjoying that energy but it's funny how the day progresses. When you're there in the morning, everybody's happy. The mall's full. And by the time you leave the mall, as everybody's dwindling, finishing up their shopping and going home, the mall slowly becomes a ghost town. the anxiety level from some of the shoppers starts to go up because their pace is increased. You stop at the grocery store and you see a whole bunch of guys walking around with phones up to their ear, like, okay, now what else do I need? What am I grabbing here? And it's just kind of interesting to watch as the mood and everything changes over the course of the day. And I'm rarely in a hurry on that day, so it's just kind of fun to enjoy it. And I love just the energy of being out and around people on Christmas Eve.
Yep. I'm going through my text right now trying to find there's no now that I had to let Morgo know. In fact, I was probably so rattled I probably called her. Wanted to talk to you about Patrick Laine for a second. Holy crap, what a like, trying to think of a good way to put this.
Moron?
Like, no, I don't. I want to be nicer. Like tone deaf. Like, he just morning skate in Columbus. And again, I am one of those people. I have no problem when players tell the truth and are honest. Like, I want that as a beat writer. But he proceeds to explain why he wanted out of Columbus and proceeds to bash that he just got tired of losing, tired of the organization and giving up and all that stuff. This is a guy that wouldn't waive his no trade to come to Minnesota so he can go to Montreal.
Right.
Who, by the way, is a worse team than Columbus.
I know. We talked about it when that whole thing was happening. I hope it doesn't work out for him to come to Minnesota.
It's just truly
this
unbelievable.
This is a guy that everybody in Winnipeg wanted to get rid of and was willing to trade for a known problem guy in Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, I just don't, this stuff usually, I'm a believer in where there's smoke, there's almost always fire.
Yeah.
And some of the comments he made were just ridiculous.
He's a heck of a goal scorer, but you watch
shut.
him at even strength. He is so lazy, even strength wise. So anyway, he goes out, he bashes them. Well, of course, he ticks off his old teammates. They took run after run at him. He was hit 4 times in the first period, gets hurt, doesn't finish the game. And then Zach Werenski, who was, by the way, a game time decision and played his ass off that night. Zach Werenski then proceeded to rip the heck out of Laine after the game. So, I look, with Patrick Laine, first of all, it'd be interesting if you actually envision Patrick Laine on this team where he'd be. Like, you'd have to put him on the first power play. So whose spot is he taking? Is he taking Zuccarello or is he taking Boldy? I mean, it'd be really interesting. Not that the Wild's power play is all that, but you'd have to figure out where he's going to play. And he could absolutely score on the power play, but I still am. I believe that the Wild lucked out from a culture standpoint, just not having him on there.
Yeah, it never made sense to me. And I said that on this show the first time you brought his name up. It just, especially with how careful Billy has been about bringing in the right guy, the right type of guy, the right personalities. That one just never made sense to me. Why you would be willing to take on a guy like that? And I haven't watched a ton of Montreal games this year, but I watched
something like 8 power play goals.
I watched him enough over the years in Winnipeg and then in Columbus he's a disinterested guy unless it's time for Patrick Laine to try to score. And he's an elite. He's got an elite shot, no question about it. And there are a lot of guys that have elite shots that care a little bit more when the puck's headed the other direction.
Yeah. And then the other weird thing going on this week is this rift that we've all known about for 3-4 years between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, and then Quinn Hughes and Rick Tocchet essentially coming out and confirming it. I mean, could not have made it clearer that it's true. So that's one of those things to pay attention to, and how that fixes itself, because Vancouver's in a funk. Those two aren't particularly playing well.
Well, Miller was out for what did he miss? 15 games or 19 games?
Yeah,
for
also for some sort of personal issue. But JT is not beloved. I mean, that's the one thing that's so very clear there, and he's got just an interesting personality. And I do think that he treats some of the young kids on that team, not that Elias is young anymore, very hard. And I think it's now escaped those locker room walls.
I've always liked his game, but I've heard that a few times too, where it's like, he's not the easiest guy with whom to play. He's not the the easiest teammate to have in the room. Not seeing it firsthand, I'd hesitate to say too much about it.
How about what's going on in New York right now?
Oh, what a mess.
Goodness. Buffalo finally wins a game. Islanders get their kicked. At that, I can't imagine how Patrick Waugh handled that. And now the Rangers situation is beyond belief as well.
Isn't it amazing when you think about where the Rangers were a year ago? I remember going into the playoffs last year, I thought the Rangers were the team that would come out of the East. And now they are an absolute mess.
Chris Kreider scratched the other night. I'll be interested to see if this is a precursor to him maybe getting moved when the freeze ends on the 27th at night. It just seemed to be completely out of the blue, very similar to Capo Caco, who was then moved. Zibanejad continues to play brutally, but there's a culture issue on that team too. Like, this really, I've talked about this with a bunch of people. I mean, there was, when Jacob Trouba said the other day when he was traded that it's a rite of passage to be fired by MSG. What he's referring to there is there have been situations before the season where one of their PR people was that went out to the NHL media tour with Vincent Trocheck, went out to dinner that night with Trocheck, another player, another PR person, and then gets fired once that person returned from from Vegas to New York because of apparent fraternizing with a player. And I'm sure that Trocheck is probably honestly completely upset that would happen because, you just a $90,000, $80,000 a year PR person just lost, their job. And I guarantee that just has ripple effects throughout a locker room when you treat people like that.
Yeah,
2 years ago, one of their longtime athletic trainer also let go because apparently did something that was against protocol.
And isn't this their third consecutive captain to get traded?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely just, I don't know, and there've been coaches fired there, and they're treated like they're working for MSG, where all of a sudden HR's on the line. Like that stuff does not happen usually in pro sports, and it just it's just a very bizarre organization, and I do think it starts at the top with Dolan. I've told this story before at the Ice Palace during the 22 Eastern Conference Final. I'm covering it, and all of a sudden, they're shutting down an entire elevator because Dolan's coming with his entourage that includes Gretzky and Glenn Sather and all these people, and they're shutting down an elevator at the Ice Palace in Tampa. The GM and the assistant GM, Stacey Russo and Julian Brisebois, could not get up to the top because security was told to wait for Jim Dolan. I mean, that, could you imagine Craig Leopold doing that in another building, or heck, Jeff Vinnick doing that anywhere? I mean, it's just a weird situation.
What's interesting is I've never all of those things are valid, but I hadn't seen it on the ice with this team. They always seemed like a relatively tight group on the ice. And I remember talking to Matt Zuccarello when he left, and you remember how emotional he was about leaving. These guys were his best friends. He had played with those guys forever, and obviously one was Henrik Lundqvist. But I mean, he had played with Kreider. He had played with Zibanejad the year before. They had been one of the best lines in hockey, and he had nothing but great things to ever say about those guys and everything about it. When we'd be there to watch games there, it never felt like a team that was disinterested or anything. But this year, they look like it's like it's not even the same team right now.
Yeah, Mika especially, just watching him play, turning pucks over, but not back checking. It's just, I don't know what's going on there. So, I kind of bring this up, to also point out, a lot of times, especially, Wild fans, media as well, you just look at this team and you're thinking that they're the worst team ever, and you don't realize what's going on in other markets and what's going on with those teams. I mean, just heck, look at the records around the league. Teams lose to good teams lose to bad teams. It's not just here, and this has been their only little funk of the season, and now they've got to get out of it. But
if you had said at the beginning of the year, and we talked about this in our broadcast the other night, that all right, you're a team that's $15 million under the salary cap. We're going to take away a couple of key guys for a pretty good chunk of the first half, and when we hit the Christmas break, you're going to have the third most points in the West.
Yeah.
Everybody would have said, I'll take that in a heartbeat. But sometimes it's just how you get there.
Yeah.
So if sometimes, and it's cost coaches jobs in other cities where they've overachieved for a while, whether it be the beginning of a season or for a whole season, and then the expectations change. This team wasn't going to win games and score points at an 18-4-4 clip like they had through the first 26 games of the year. Nobody was. There was always going to be a spot like this, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't diminish anything they've done. Instead, you should be standing back saying, thank God they banked all the points that they did so that a 3-6 stretch doesn't knock them out of a playoff spot or out of a playoff position or knock them down in the race. They can withstand that because of the fact that they were so efficient early in the season, winning games. And it wasn't like they just beat up on bad teams. I mean, that 18-4-4 start included a win in Florida, a win in Tampa. They got a win at home against Tampa, a win at home against Toronto. I mean, they beat some good teams in that stretch as well. Won a game in Edmonton. It wasn't like it was just, okay, now this is the first time you ran into some of the best teams. And people now say, oh, you can't beat any good teams. Well, they beat some good teams this year. Now they caught some good teams at the wrong time and lost to them. But everybody loses more often to the good teams. That's why they're the good teams.
Right. But they've got to start playing much better against teams that are in the Western Conference playoffs, and that's where they have struggled this year, 2-6-1.
No doubt. But now, like I said before, go back to those games and on this recent stretch during this funk. The Winnipeg game, dismiss a little bit because of the schedule situation.
Mm-hmm.
The Vegas game, I thought they played a great game and could have won the game for sure. Got beat 3-2.
I'll tell you what, I'm starting to think Vegas is the team to beat. Like, they are playing great. I watched that game. Yeah, like, they are playing awesome right now. They're
deep and their defensive.
And this is a team that lost 6
NHL.
or 7 free agents, and they've just they've got players playing really well. Eichel's playing like a freaking Hart Trophy candidate right now.
He's playing great. Their defensive core is what makes them a legit contender in the West.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best best six, 1 through 6 in the league. They're big. They have guys who can move the puck. They have guys who can score. They're physical. They've got a little bit of nasty to them. Their goaltending is good enough. I think they're for sure one of the 2 or 3 in the West that you have to watch. Colorado's starting to play better. I think there's a lot of teams right now in the Western Conference.
By the way, the Wild's only game in Vegas this year. Second of back-to-back.
Right.
Where they lose an hour.
San Jose the night before.
Yeah.
It's
actually, they don't lose an hour.
No, but it's a second of back-to-back, and it's a short flight, but it's still a flight, and it's still travel, and it's still having played the night before.
Yeah, without a doubt. We'll be right back. Hockey isn't the only thing happening on the ice, and as lakes are freezing over, it's time for ice fishing. OnX Fish offers the most comprehensive fishing tools for increasing your confidence and success on the hard water. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. OnX Fish also shows you hotspots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. For a limited time, download OnX Fish for free in Minnesota and Wisconsin, or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information on the app that is changing the game on ice.
Save smarter and grow your funds faster with a certificate from Royal Credit Union. Royal's 4.25% 9-month certificate has no minimum opening balance and a locked-in rate for a guaranteed return at maturity. Open a 4.25% APY 9-month certificate at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 12/5/24, insured by NCUA.
Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Anthony, really cool trip coming up next summer, July 9th to the 17th. We're going to Madrid and Barcelona. One of my cousins actually, last night's dinner, he had just gotten back from like a couple months in Spain, so he's got tons of recommendations for us to do. I showed him our day trips too, and he's been to all those places, so excited about that.
Yeah, I've had people start to stop me to talk to me about, here, you got to go to this place. You got to see this place. But so far, everybody that has brought it up to me has raved about the food, the wine, and I'm really excited about it. I've not been before, which is similar to a lot of our trips, but it's kind of like last year when we started talking about the Portugal trip, and people that had been there started raving about just how cool it was and how much we'd enjoy it. Turned out to be a great trip. So I'm really excited about this one, and I got to start venturing in now, I suppose, to Spanish wine between here and there to do a little pre-trip research, so I make sure I have at least some idea what we're drinking when we get over there.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool. If you go to defineddestinations.com, you can look at the trip, look at the trip itinerary, get more information and all that stuff. And it's going to be really, really cool. Looking forward to that. I got a couple trips to Europe next summer. I'm actually a month later, just like every summer, a month later, I'm going to cover the NHL media tour in Italy. So that'll be really cool. And that will be sort of like a pre-appetizer to the Olympics in 2026 in Milan. And so the NHL is trying to make that like a sort of a, where you have like every team's got at least one really big Olympian that's going to, almost be a shoe-in. And so I'm
introduce them to the fans in Milan a little bit and help publicize it.
So really looking forward to it. It's going to be a blast. I'm also covering the Four Nations tournament coming up here. Man, USA is starting to get battered though. Austin Matthews is out. Got a little worried the other day when Matthew Tkachuk got kneed by Kucherov, but he returned to the game. So we'll see what's happening there. But man, like you just wonder if the Leafs or if Austin's gonna have to bow out. I mean, it just. And then I got to think that USA, if that has happened, they're going to just pick who's playing best. Like I don't think it'll be necessarily Tage Thompson. I don't know if you're going to agree with me. The one guy I would like to see on the team, because I think he's just playing unbelievable right now, is Clayton Keller. Like I just like, to me, he wasn't put on the team because of guys like Jack Hughes and Matt Boldy. Well, Keller's playing better than most of these guys.
Playing in a similar role to what, I mean, Hughes has been terrific. He had started slowly for about the first week and a half, and since then,
can you imagine Keller on that right circle?
Yeah,
on the power play.
I do. Although, like we talked about before, I haven't really looked at the roster enough to say like where guys might fit and where they slot. Mm-hmm. But Keller, to me, I would put behind in that role. I'd put behind the guys who were on the team at least to start. I do like Keller's game, but I just don't. I don't know that he's a strike fear in you guy like some of these other guys we're talking about might be. I would personally, I'd prefer Tage Thompson to him as an overall player, but we'll see. You just don't have an idea for sure, like what Billy and the staff have decided about, or at least their plan is for where guys fit on special teams, where guys fit in checking type roles and shutdown type roles. So it's different than just putting together like who are our best 12 forwards that were born in America. It's not the same. I do like Keller's game and I think he's been good, but boy, and I haven't watched New Jersey a ton yet this year, but every time I start to do some digging into what are some of the better lines analytically, New Jersey's got like 4 or 5 of the top forwards in the league in terms of how tough they are to score against, what their expected goals for percentage are. And Hughes and his group they're not just scoring, they're also limiting everything against it. They've been one of the better puck possession and chance creating teams in the league, and he's been a big reason.
Yeah, that might be a formidable contender in the Eastern Conference with Florida, Carolina, and some of those teams. Let's go to some Twitter questions. We got some good ones this week. How long do you expect before we see Juracek in the National Hockey League? I think they're going to just let him play for a bit in down there. I mean, first of all, until the Wild have an injury on the right side, they're not going to force him into the lineup. They want to put him in the best best place to play. The key is, will he continue to be patient? And obviously in Columbus, he wanted to be in the NHL, but this was, as Bill Guerin said at the time of the trade, an investment. This wasn't necessarily for the now. When you give up that much in a trade, this is clearly for the future, and they've got to get his game going right and make sure that he's on the team next year. And then, maybe you transition Bogosian into being the 7th D next year. But, I still think that Juracek and Spacek have shots. AJ Spears, what is the staple dish drink in the Russo? I love this, the Russo LaPanta household Christmas tradition. So apparently I'm part of your household now.
Well,
I am kind of like a, since all your kids are out of town or elsewhere tonight, I'm kind of like your adopted child.
Yeah, and the door's always open around here at these kind of holidays. But our Feast of Seven Fishes is different. The menu's different every year, but I love that tradition. This year we tried a few new things we hadn't had before. We had some batter fried walleye sliders that were really good. The scallops were good. We made a different Dijon balsamic sauce that I liked. We always, not always, but I'd say for the last maybe 8 or 10 years, it's been build your own pizzas on Christmas Eve, which is fun. And then we do more of a sit down meal on Christmas night. And as I mentioned earlier, tonight it's the spinalis cuts from Fellers, which we're really excited about. The marbling looks amazing on them. So if the chef doesn't screw them up, we're going to enjoy a feast tonight.
So the marbling, you see that on the steak before
you can see it. Absolutely.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no matter what the cut of steak, you can see it when you go to the store to buy it. And that's one of the main criteria that I look for when I decide what kind of steak I'm going to go with. And the spinalis has the great marbling of a good ribeye, but it's more tender than the ribeye. So it's got the best of both worlds. It's my favorite cut of the meat, and their marbling is unbelievable. Like, for them to sell it as a steak, it has to get to at least level 5, otherwise they'll turn it into hamburger. And most of theirs are beyond that. This spinalis tonight, I'm certainly not authorized to analyze it, but just comparing it to what I've had before, I'm guessing we're looking at like 7 or 8 level marbling on this, which is unheard of. It's terrific.
Basket of Adorable, still the greatest Twitter name out there. The avatar is just a baby.
Basket of Adorable.
Do you get paid double time for working on a holiday? Which is funny. And then he says a 12-ounce filet and 2 glasses of wine. Pretty funny.
Well, we've got a good Chianti going now, and we've got a Super Tuscan to pair with the steak. So I think we'll be adequately fed, and our thirst will be quenched tonight.
Yeah. Corey Dog 30 asks, how much money can the Wild spend on free agents this offseason? It's absolutely impossible to tell right now because, one, we don't know if the cap's going to be 92.5 or 97. We don't know how much Kaprizov, even though his number will start on the next year, how much he's going to get, and that will determine how much Rossi can get and all that type of stuff. So really, I think it's going to be a lot less than the Wild even envisioned at the time.
But we've talked about this before. The biggest difference in what it will be and what they thought it was going to be is Brock Faber.
Yeah.
You had no idea that you were going to have a defenseman that was going to take it's the best problem that you can possibly imagine to have, but they weren't counting on that money being allocated to Brock Faber. That was money that they thought was going to be headed to somebody from outside the organization.
Without a doubt. And now you're going to have to pay Rossi as well. Christopher Cash asked restaurant recommendations for Raleigh on January 4th. You know what I would say, although I tried to make reservations today when I saw this Twitter message, and I couldn't get in there, and that's the Angus Barn.
Yeah, and it's not my favorite place. It's cool to go just to see it. The food isn't great. The steaks are mediocre, but the atmosphere is kind of cool.
It's cool.
I love the Wild Turkey bar upstairs. Yeah. It's great to go.
They have a place
bourbon
in the back that you walk through the kitchen. It's called the Meat Locker, and it's their cigar club in the back of the place. And
they had a great patio.
Their wine cellar is awesome too.
The wine cellar is great, and the setting it's just corny and it's just different than anything,
especially like around Christmas time, and I'm sure right after the New Year, it's just gorgeous with the lights.
They keep the Christmas tree set up all the way through January because people go out there just to get their pictures taken.
If you want something different, I would pick the Angus Barn. Don't listen to Anthony. Anthony's snooty with the steaks.
I'm saying it's worth going to see, but the steaks just aren't anything special.
But you can get great chicken there. You can get it's just a fun place. It's not. You're not going there to get a high end steak that you would get at Mastro
That's all. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying. So if I'm going to a steak place, I want to get a great steak.
What's the Italian place that you and I ate at with Lou Danny there once?
Yeah, that was okay. It wasn't anything special. I don't remember the name of it. But
the patio was really cool.
Patio was cool. Yeah, and it was. We haven't had a lot of what I would call great meals in Raleigh. And everything's kind of spread out. Like downtown there's not much going on, so it's a weird vibe there. Really, in fact, I think on last year's trip, it was just Kevin Gorg, Louie, and I.
Yeah,
we just went to a chain steak place that was, I think it was Ruth's Chris maybe, and and it was okay.
There are actually a lot of really good restaurants downtown. We just don't stay downtown, so we don't explore it a ton.
Yeah.
You should just. I would tweet at Mike Maniscalco or Mike Sunheim or something on Twitter and ask them. Mike knows some great. I actually last year during the playoffs, I was there. I watched them beat the Islanders to win, and then I stayed like 3 days after to sit down with Freddie Anderson and Jake Gensel. And Mike Maniscalco and I went to an awesome restaurant that he was buddies with the owner, and we sat at the bar, and it was tremendous. Actually, you would have loved it. But of course, I can't remember the name of it. Nikolai goes, how long of a leash do some of these unproductive forwards get before Billy tries to move one of them? I mean, and he's talking about Hartman, JoJo, or is it unrealistic? I think it's
Johansson's game has been terrific this whole year. Like anybody who's watching him and saying like that he's doing nothing, he's suffering the same thing Matt Boldy is over the last 8 games, playing without their centerman. So his scoring numbers are going to go down, but his game has been terrific this year. It really has from the start.
Yeah, Hartman has not.
He's not been great.
And his no move becomes a 15-team no trade next year. So if Billy wants to move him, there's technically 16 teams that he could try. But JoJo's contract's up, so you don't have to worry about that. And I'm still like, with Foligno, like to me, his value goes so beyond the scoring. First of all, his defensive numbers are always great. His physicality is always great. His willingness to stand up for opponents is always great. And in that locker room, he's needed.
Right.
So like to me,
and we saw the impact that Trenyon had when he came back in the lineup the other night.
He was freaking
really
great.
good.
That was the best he's looked all year.
Yeah, and those guys, they've been just fine. The guys that you hoped would be the guys that would step up to score when you were down a scorer are the guys, to me anyway, they're like Hartman and Goudreau. Those are the guys that you thought, okay, you're going to elevate your role in the lineup. Now's the time to step up and score, and neither one of them scored. And I think what'll be interesting to see is just how long you continue, if you're still dried up a little bit offensively, before you start to consider giving Liam Ogren a shot back in the NHL again. He's putting up great numbers in the American League. I think it's great that they're leaving him down there and not rushing it.
Yeah.
But if it's, let's say you get to mid-January and either somebody gets banged up in your top 6 or your team just continues to struggle to score, maybe he's a guy that could provide a spark.
Yeah, I am doing a big Marco Rossi story for Friday, and in there, I won't give away the big part of the story right now. You can read that Friday. But I asked Bill Guerin in that story about Liam Ogren because I've gotten a bunch of questions about is he getting the Marco Rossi treatment down there, and that is what Bill Guerin said, is that I'm no longer bringing him up to just play third and fourth line. Like, I want him to be ready to make an impact once he comes up. And so he's, this is why they signed Reese Johnson, Brandon Gaunce, Ben Jones, Devin Shore in the offseason. I'm sure I'm missing Travis Boyd. This is why they signed him, to bring those guys up. And he wants Liam to play in a role down there where he's just going to, continue to soar. And right now he's playing well. I want to ask you this, Anthony, because I've gotten a ton of questions about Jesper Wallstedt, and this is the first one I saw of the ones that I bookmarked. Are the Wild ruining Wally's confidence with his deployment? This person asks. Never played with a healthy top 4, meaning Faber, Middleton, Brodin, Spurgeon. Played him against 3 of the top NHL teams when they were hurt. A lot of people have been, well, why didn't he play against Philly and not Utah? Or, why didn't he play
back-to-back?
Yeah. Why play against Vegas when you could play against him in Philly? Why not play against Utah instead of Winnipeg? I mean, you and I talked about it. It was the same thing with Fleury and him playing in LA rather than in Anaheim. Sometimes you go with your best guy in the game that you're going to get the 2 points and roll the dice on the second one. But what do you think of that? I mean, to me, this is big boy league. He's 22. I don't look at it like that. What I'm more concerned with, and I brought this up to you the other day, and I don't think that you totally agreed with me, but right now I haven't been impressed with what I've seen from him. And the guys these young guys that have turned into studs in the NHL, the Ottingers, they were outstanding in the minors too. And we haven't seen him even dominate down there.
Yeah.
And I look at him right now and I just, again, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and become like the fans that thought Marco Rossi was a bust and everything. But right now, like I look at him as like, I've heard about this guy being like the best prospect outside the NHL for 3-4 years now. And right now, every time I see him, I just don't see that type of specialness. And then you just start to wonder, like, all right, maybe did they overhype him a bit, or are they expecting him to be something that he's not going to be?
I'm not worried at all about them hurting his confidence right now. And I think the line saying that this is the big boy league right here, that's exactly right. You got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And them playing him the way they're playing, if he had come up here and played better than Marc-Andre Fleury or Philip Gustafson, he'd be in goal. And I dismiss some of the struggles in Iowa only because I do understand when you look at a guy, these are humans, they're not robots. And when all summer you're planning to be in the NHL, yes, I'm going to spend some time in the American League, but I'm going to be in the NHL. Now you get the injuries at the beginning where he couldn't, out of his control. He did everything they wanted him to do in camp. We can't call you up because of injuries. And now you then you struggle for a few starts down there and you start to wonder, like, am I ever going to get called back up? And you can get inside your own head in a hurry. And I think that probably did happen to him. He talked about that in some of the articles that you wrote. Mm-hmm. But now you've got your chance up here, and I think he's been okay. I don't think he's been anything special. I'm far from a goalie expert, but to me, there's two things that I see, one good and one that I hope I'm seeing it wrong. I think he's really athletic, and the way he moves side to side, that looks like an elite goaltender to me. The other part, though, is that he looks small in the net, and he's a like big guy. And yet, like, there were a couple of goals the other night. There was one that beat him over the shoulder. When he came out, he was out on top of the blue paint, and the puck still went over his shoulder and into the net. And I thought, that just doesn't look like it should happen to a guy that's as big as him. If a guy that big comes out that far, you shouldn't be able to go over the top of his shoulder and still be under the crossbar.
Yeah, and by the way, not to change subjects, but that we have just hammered the Wild for their PK for the last month. Make a freaking save. All of them. Gus, Fleury, and Wally. Like, let's be honest, that winning goal against Utah was a horrendous goal by Flower. And again, like I get there was a breakdown on the one Eller's goal, but make the save. And then, the one where Wally put it in the netting, it's an unscreened point shot, make the save. The best penalty killer has got to be your goalie, and they're not.
They haven't gotten saves for sure, and the penalty kills lacking confidence. I made the comment on the show the other night. I think it was 5 out of 7. 5 out of the last 7 power play goals they've allowed have come in the first 14 seconds of a power play, and 4 of the 7 have come in the first 7 seconds, which is. You got to win faceoffs. When you win that first faceoff, it's amazing how quickly time disappears. You get the one clear, that's always 20 seconds. And now they've got to enter the zone cleanly. Look at the Wild's power play is a perfect example how difficult that can be. But when you lose that first faceoff, and now right away it's bang, 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 and then yes, you need a save. So they've had a couple where it's been clean loss on the face-off, 2 passes, and you don't get the save, and the puck's in your net in 7 seconds.
Yeah, well, to your point, they killed 1 of 3 in Winnipeg, and what was the one they won? The one where they won the face-off and had all those disruptions right at the defensive blue line. Couple more, then we'll wrap up the show. Jason says, since Brock Nelson has a 16-team no trade clause, do you think the Wild are on that list, or would he waive? I think he would come here if that opportunity presented itself, whether he's on the list or not. That's just my gut from doing some due diligence there. Trying to see some more here. A lot about Carell's contract. We've discussed this a bunch. Do broadcasters, writers have a mandatory 3-day break? Apparently not. We're doing a prod now, and I'm writing a story tomorrow. All right, last one. Favorite Christmas movie, Anthony?
Well, we just watched Rudolph this morning, and when I was a kid, that was my favorite of all those, like the claymation or cartoon ones. Rudolph was my favorite. I still, when we watched it today, it does make you laugh when you look at like what TV
looked like when we
used to be. And as a side note to that, one of the trips we were on, there was a channel in our room that had all old TV shows on it all day long, like just random sitcom after random sitcom. And I had it on in the background and saw some shows I haven't seen in 30 years. And boy, was TV bad back then. But that's probably my favorite one. Of the more modern ones, I love Elf. Elf makes me laugh.
See, I'm all comedies. Like I like Scrooged and Bad Santa. I mean, stuff that like you probably don't want your kids seeing. Scrooge was awesome with Bill Murray. You remember that? It was just so good.
I thought that was good. It wasn't my favorite.
Christmas Vacation. I know you're not a fan of that, right?
That was my first date with Margot was to see Christmas Vacation in 1989.
You are a fan of it.
I like it. There's some lines in it that really make me laugh.
Margot.
Yeah. I don't know Margot.
Yeah.
But those are good. I like Elf among those, like the comedy.
What was the
ones.
one that was in? We talked about this last night at my cousin's. What was the one that was like Sinbad and Phil Hartman and Arnold Schwarzenegger? It was filmed in St. Paul. Was it Jingle All the Way?
Jingle All the Way.
Yeah. I just think it's funny because you see like Mickey's in downtown St. Paul and all that stuff. What are you looking forward to? What's your big hope for 2025? And don't say something stupid like the Wild win the Cup.
No, well, I think you know me better than that.
Well, you know what I mean. Like, I don't mean stupid like something that can't. I'm just mean like something actually that you were hoping for, like 20. If you had a really like big wish for 2025, what would it be? That was how we ended my time at my cousin's last night. It was actually pretty heartfelt. Everybody going in a circle talking about it, and you know how much I like opening
heartfelt comments. Yeah. Well, the 2024 was a pretty good year for us, and families all healthy and everything. So I clearly always wish for that. But I would just, for me personally, like I hope we get some resolution to everything that's happening in the TV sports world right now. It's been 5-6 years now of going back to our company was sold. We had COVID, we had a bankruptcy. We've had all these carriage deals. We've been living in a lot of unknowns for the last 6 years. So in the sports world, that's what I would hope for. And in the real world, I hope that everybody stays happy and healthy in my family.
Yeah, obviously health is big. It's funny that you in the real world you brought that up. Like, for somebody that like lives so much on Twitter, like, man, I just wish we could all get along. Like, it is so disgusting the things that people say to each other in online, the meanness, the lack of humanity. Like even just like, I was thinking this the other day, like these are actual like people that we are all friends with that are out there, and like they'll sit there and say the most vile stuff on Twitter, and like people like celebrating the death of the CEO here from Maple Grove, like from United Healthcare, like who, like this is real life.
Right.
The guy was just shot in the back of his head. His family has nobody anymore, and you're just celebrating.
And you have people saying like, "Well, he killed so many." Like, come on.
I mean, it's just and that's the type of stuff, or both sides of the aisle. The fact that like now they are like legit. If whatever you don't believe, like that person is your enemy, and just real like it. Just like we all just need to chillax and just enjoy our only life and live in peace and harmony. There we go. Yep. We'll discuss this in Spain with everybody.
Really, when you think about it, what says peace and harmony more than worse seats in the house?
Yeah, or more than me. Watch that, and tomorrow I'm going to tell off some random fan on Twitter, forgetting that person's a human being. All right. Awesome. January 6th, our next live show at 7 p.m., and that is at Tuttle's. January 22nd, 7 p.m. at Elsie's. Go to definedestinations.com, please, to check out the Spain trip. Thanks to our incredible sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems. They do everything, heating, cooling, electrical. It's just unbelievable company. Royal Credit Union, Onyx Maps, and Twill in the Diana Galleria. Talk to you on January 6th, everybody.
So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I don't but the world won't forgive.